in thinking about how we communicate both visually and, telling stories and providing education to make our programs more effective. So here you see Tori, actual Tori, not Ashley, and Celeste, the graphic designer from Calcasa, is with us today also. So you can see our objectives here today. We want to cover basic design concepts and how they enhance your work, identify design tools. I believe that all the tools here, and Celeste, you can correct me, but all the tools here are easily accessible over the internet and free, or maybe some suggestions for low-cost things if you have a budget. And we want you to know how to implement elements of a creative brief to use for your messaging and communication. So we hope that after going through this web conference that you'll be able to better tell the story of your RPE program activities to stakeholders and decision makers, young people and adults alike, to use the design concepts to help with education and outreach in the community, and also, enhance or improve your event flyers and program material. So those are our goals today, and hopefully you were coming on thinking that was what you were going to be learning. So what is graphic design? I think, we all have an idea of what graphic design is, but public health has used graphic design a lot for a long time to communicate visually with audiences. It's been used for probably almost every public health issue. Here is a picture looking at educating about the symptoms of Ebola through community art in community spaces. We've used public health, or we've used graphic design in public health for not only making people aware of issues or educate them about things, public health issues like smoking or violence prevention or how to be a good bystander, but we also see it used in educational materials from, our curricula and worksheets to things like instructional aids, like the signs we see in bathrooms that kind of quickly show you a visual of how to properly wash your hands, or when we're on a bus or a plane and it tells us in a quick way how to open the emergency doors. These are all ways that we use visuals and design to teach people and inform people. But we also use it to sway people or to help them to connect to our content, to help them understand it better, to take an idea that maybe people don't know about and be able to design visuals in a way that people can see themselves in the messaging or see themselves as part of the solution. So if we can use visuals and design effectively, we can bring folks into understanding our message, into connecting it, and also be able to promote ideas, events, our organizations better than without. So these are some of the reasons why, we want to think about how we use visuals, how we use our newsletters and flyers to our advantage. Communication is important. And so it also is something that can help to lend legitimacy to our organizations and our events. So because they help get people involved, but also when people are able to see themselves or connect with the visuals we use, we know that they will see that as a place that they belong or a message that's for them. So in RPE, we can use some of these concepts you'll learn today and some visuals to talk about our programs, how effective they are, who they're working with, why they're important. You can use them in, briefs for your school decision makers to take information from the young people you're working with and create a one-page brief with visuals and graphs and photos that are messaging from the young people about how they want decision makers to treat them or to change policy at school. It's also a way that, you can use perhaps the information from your evaluation toolkits to show that your program is working, to show that the message, the changes that you want to make in the school are happening. And then, of course, when folks are doing school-wide campaigns or you're doing community actions that you want other folks in the community to participate in, being able to communicate the details of that in a really visually appealing and eye-catching way is important to being able to get people there. So in thinking about all those things, and we can think about examples along the way, too, when Celeste takes over, of how we can use these and really specifically in our programs. So let's see. Let's move on. We have a polling question here, and I'm so excited to see all the people on here. I'm happy to see Liat in the chat. So I got distracted for a minute, full disclosure. So let's move on to this poll, and let me ask you this. How are you currently using, actually it's not a poll, you can put this in the text chat. How are you currently using graphic design in your work? So if you can, put how you're currently using graphic design in your work. Let us know, and I'll kind of read some of them out as they're coming up. I'm assuming they're going to come up kind of quickly because I know for those of you that I work with that a lot of you are using visuals, you're using posters, you're using flyers. So let's see. Sarah says prevention social media. Oh, and good. She checked out them on social media at CCS_prevents. Liat's been developing a social norms campaign for the entire campus at UC Berkeley, light pole banners and posters. That's exciting. Adriana is creating flyers for events. Jen is also creating flyers and posters. Edwin, flyers, memes, social media. Aaron, social media, newsletters, poster campaigns in communities and schools. Kira is creating infographics for tabling and Facebook posts. Lots of social media, Adriana added. Aaron is using them on the website. And Abby says she's currently considering how to communicate organizational services and topic-oriented issues for brochures. That's a good one. It's one we often do, and brochures can certainly be a bit dry, right? They're so information heavy. Sheila is doing social media, education, and organizational marketing collateral and special event materials. Okay, that's a lot of really great examples. A lot of the ways that our organizations are using visuals. Let's talk about, so this is how you're doing it now. Let's talk about how you want to be doing it. So how would you like to be using graphic design? So it could be that you'd like to use it more, you'd like to use it better, you'd like to be more led by your priority audience, more youth-led. Could be all kinds of answers. So, or you could be hoping to use it at all. So how would you like to be using graphic design? I like this pause in the text when it just tells me multiple attendees are typing. No, now we wait. No, all come up at once. So Erin would like to have a more succinct way of putting things together and not be reinventing the wheel each time. Yes. Using more of your branding. Use it for branding the program and club to get the message out there clearly. Love to have more engaging swag to give away, yeah, and really want to know how to best connect visually with various populations, students, faculty, reach a larger audience, and hopefully start a poster campaign in the local high schools. That's certainly something that at least the Tier 2 programs are doing a lot of. The Tier 2 programs in RPE, I know not everybody is in RPE. Edwin wants to have more clarity for youth and more youth-led design. Daniela would like to use more graphics, having more intentional graphics for the community, both for age and cultural backgrounds. Sheila would like more integration of graphic design on the CCS website and launch a broader awareness campaign utilizing street banners and community flyers. Yeah. I think that idea about that clear messaging, too, is a really important thing because some of our organizations have really, really clear messaging and branding that sometimes fits for prevention programs as well and sometimes doesn't. So that's a balance. And sometimes our organizations don't really have any direction with branding and communications at all. So hopefully, at the end of this, you'll also have more knowledge to take to your organization to say, okay, here's what I'd like to do, and here's what I need, and here's how I can help with it. All right. Great. Thanks, everyone, for your thoughtful input there. So now we want to talk about the process. Now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty, and I'm going to let the expert take over. Celeste, do you have anything you want to add about what graphic design is, why it's important? And I'm going to hand you the floor.
Thank you, Jessie. Yeah, I think some of our audience members mentioned in the text chat, about branding, and essentially with branding and within graphic design, we do want your audience to be able to recognize you. So you are going to have like similar elements to your design, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And that not only makes it easier for you, but also for your audience to recognize your materials and the type of work that you do through visual representation. So we will be talking about that today. But first, let's go ahead and start with kind of an overview of what we will be covering today. So the way that I like to go into my work and start new projects is through these series of steps. So initially, I like to do research, and that includes having a creative brief. And then after that, I go into ideation, where I brainstorm ideas and look for different examples of what I might create. And then after that, I will go into development. And that's where we'll talk about the different components and elements of design. And then I go into a revision phase where I meet with my stakeholders or my supervisors or whoever is the lead on the project, so they can revise and make sure that we are meeting all of their expectations. And then finally, we go into the finalized stage where we finalize our files and export them and share them with the world. So that's what we're going to be going over today. So the first thing I want to share with you all is kind of the research or the creative brief that I bring with me when I'm talking to a project manager. So these are the questions that I'll usually ask them, and we do have a link below so you can download a sheet if you wanted to look this over. So some of the questions I ask is who I'm designing for, what problem we are trying to solve, what exactly we are trying to achieve, who we are trying to reach, how can we reach them, and then also some other important information. So to go through these a little bit more, so for who I'm designing for, I usually like to look at either the organization or the project and see what their mission is, what their values are, really like an overall view of what they are. And then with that, I go specifically into the project and what the problem they are trying to do. It might be maybe to get people at an event, bring more awareness to legislators about a certain topic, raise donations for a new project that we might be trying to hold. So very specific problems. And then with that, what goal we're trying to achieve. Are we trying to reach a certain amount of donation goals? Do we want a certain amount of people to attend our event? Things of that sort. And then with that, who are we trying to reach? Is it going to be youth in our community? Is it going to be the parents of that youth? Legislators that are that can have power to create change in our communities? And then that leads to the next question of if we know who our audience is, then we can figure out how to reach them through the style and the tone of our visuals. Obviously, something that might reach out to a young person, a teenager, may not look the same as something that will speak to a legislator or somebody in an organization. And then after I go through all that, then I start asking the serious questions of what is expected. Is this going to be digital? Is this going to be printed? What's the budget for this? How much time do I have to create all of this? Is there a point of contact that's going to be approving all of my designs? And any other miscellaneous questions. So again, if you, we did share a link if you want to download this little outline so you can fill out or you can have as an example. The link is in the text chat.
And I think we wanted to ask folks which areas of this creative brief they feel like they need the most help on. So you all can start answering in this polling question that just appeared on your screen of which areas of the creative brief do you feel like you need the most help on. And we're broadcasting those results live, so Celeste and Jesse, you all can see how folks are voting. So only a handful of folks have voted. I encourage you to think about what you want more assistance on so that way we can help you out today. So Celeste, it looks like a lot of folks are answering that they would feel like they need the most help on style and tone and audience and demographics too. Overwhelmingly, a lot of folks are voting for that. And then we got a few folks scattered throughout too across the entire brief. So good thing we're going through all of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So as Jesse mentioned before, I taught this workshop at NSAC and then at the statewide conference. And it was very similar. At the end, we asked the question of what people were struggling with or what they wanted to learn more from. And I think overall, yeah, it was the audience who they were reaching and what that audience liked, or how do we know what that audience is going to, you know, is going to react to in a positive way and not just ignore. So we will be going through some of that today.
Before we move on, there is a clarifying question from Leah. How is who are you designing for different from audience?
So who are you designing for would be more of your organization. So for example, me, I'm designing for Calcasa. It's a Calcasa material. So I know what their mission and values are, whereas depending on the project that I'm working on, it might be a report that's meant for our members, or it might be a new graphic that is meant to sway legislators to do something with budget or with passing a new law. So that's the differentiation between those two. One is more so of like who you're designing on behalf of, and then who you're designing for. Hopefully that clarifies it. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. So after I have those answers, or those questions to answer those questions, I then move on to brainstorming and creating ideas. So a couple of the different tools I like to use with that is Pinterest, very helpful. Behance is a platform through Adobe, so a lot of designers go there and share their work, and Dribbble, which is also a similar platform. And so what I like to do with this is just kind of get an idea of what other people are doing. So I believe this screenshot is from Pinterest, and the search that I put in there was graphic design, event, poster. And so it came up with all of these different examples that I could kind of see what was going on and kind of take some ideas from other people. Because like we said, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. Other people have done it before. We can kind of get an idea of what's being shown. And even from this small scale, you can kind of see that there's always like a big idea that you can see, and then the details are more to call you in. So I know a question that we had was about knowing your audience and designing for your audience. So here we have an example of a poster that was created for a bar and their patrons talking about consent. And I believe the poster, the first poster on the left, was created through the organization from Oasis. And then they took this poster to their community bar, and they asked them, hey, can you all put this up in your bar so we can teach our community about consent? And then the bar took one look at it and obviously saw that this would not relate to their patrons and their customers. It's not something that their customers would really look at. It just doesn't go with who they are. So they ended up having a local tattoo artist that was their neighbor redesign this to better fit the feel of the bar and their patrons. So you can see how here the same message is presented in two different ways would speak to two different audiences. The first one, the same content is there, but it's a lot more bright and cheerful. I think it's something that resonates with us from, like, I don't know, like offices and things of that sort, but it probably would not fit well in a bar. Whereas the one on the right, it's a little bit more edgy. It has that vibe of, you know, locally made, kind of artisanal, hand-drawn, but still professional. And I think that brings the eye more of like, hey, what is this talking about? I want to see what's drawn on here. And then it brings your audience in to not only see what's drawn on there, but then takes away the message that's there. Here we have another example that was provided to us by Family Services of Tulare County. So this is a logo that was made for their Los Vidas group. And here we can see, again, their audience is youth-centered. So obviously the font that they chose for this is very, like, it looks hand-drawn, doesn't look super formal. It's more laid back. And then the icons that they chose to put on there speak to what they do. So they have like a little megaphone, a fist, groups of people, messaging. So again, it speaks to what they're actually doing. And then to make it even more clear, they have their tagline saying mobilizing against sexual violence. So then it makes it super clear of what this group is about. And you can kind of, it implies that it's for youth just from the youthful vibe that it gives off. Another example that was provided by Family Services of Tulare County was the set of memes that were created for their social media. So these are memes that we have seen, or at least I have seen on like my social media feed, where there's a format and you just fill in the blank. And this could easily be done by students of a group. It could be assigned as like, hey, y'all, let's create 2 or 3 examples, and then we'll go over it as a group and choose which ones we're going to share. And then that way it gets more traction. They can share with their friends. If they're involved in the process, I think that makes them more confident in their work and makes them want to share this work with their friends. And also that way they're sharing the message of consent and their organization, not just, everyday content. So with that, I want to talk about collaboration and using your audience to create designs and campaigns. So you don't always have to do this work yourself. You can ask for help from others in different steps of the process. So different ways you can ask for people to collaborate are in the brainstorming process. You can ask for some ideas from different people. You can ask to collaborate with artists or designers. I know a lot of community college or local colleges have programs that, teach digital design or have an artist or art department, maybe reaching out to those people to collaborate in that sort of thing. Having test groups after you've created some content, sharing with other people to get their feedback before it goes out to mass audiences, maybe sharing that with a couple of different test groups. You can ask for people to help you market things. So you're not the only platform who's sharing your content. You can ask other people to share the content you're creating. And with that also messaging and talking about what messaging resonates better with your audience. Speaking with that audience directly, I believe, helps you clarify that a lot more, because a lot of the times we have ideas of what we think they might want to hear, but it's really not the case. And below we have some links that are from the Reliance organization. They collaborated with Berkeley Media Studies Group, and these two reports talk about the different messaging for talking about prevention and how people who are outside of our field might have a better chance to accept this idea instead of brushing it off right away. It also talks about how that does happen sometimes when you bring up certain words, people aren't comfortable, so they shut you out completely. So these two reports talk about different messaging ideas to help with that if you want to check those out. So after talking about collaboration and some ideas on how to better find what your audience may need, we're going to go ahead and talk about development and actually using different tools and elements to create a cohesive design that looks good to your audience. So we will be talking about different design assets that include color, images, and typography, principles of composition. So in that, we'll talk about negative space, alignment, contrast, and proximity, and then a couple of tools to remember. These are overall tools of hierarchy, balance, and visual rules. So the first thing I want to talk about is color. I think we've all seen a color wheel before. If you need help choosing colors or picking specific color codes so you keep that consistent, there is the color.adobe.com, which helps with that. And you can just have those specific codes so then you can use them throughout different designs, and the red color that you choose or the blue color that you choose will always be the exact same blue color. We also have Canva and Contrast Checker. Canva is an online platform that helps you create designs, and I believe they do have a free premium for nonprofits, but you do have to fill out a form. And then Contrast Checker will check the contrast so that it is more ADA compliant. So the first thing that I want to talk about is complementary colors. So when you choose two different colors in the color wheel, if you want to create a lot of contrast and have a lot of variety, complementary colors are pretty good at that. Since they are the opposites, they won't blend with each other. This brings like a lot of awareness to your eye just because the colors are so different from each other. So if you want to create, contrast, a complementary color palette would be a good one to go with in your design. Analogous colors are colors that are next to each other on the color wheel, and using a color palette within this area kind of creates a more cohesive design. We see this I think in our field a lot because of the teal that we use for sexual assault awareness. I've seen color palettes that range between like that teal blue green or the teal blue purple that are used a lot in our field, and that just makes things, it gives us some variety, but it all goes together. The next one I want to talk about is the triad. So these are three colors that are across from each other in a triangle in the color wheel. This, again, creates a lot of contrast, and it gives you more variety. So if you're looking to create something colorful, something that exists in this triangle, if you shift the triangle and rotate it, then you get a different color variation. And again, we see these colors in our field, the teal and then the orange we've seen in February for Teen Dating Awareness Month. And then the purple with our with domestic violence. Thank you, Tori. So this is also a good way to choose a contrasting color palette that'll bring a lot of vibrance into your design. And then finally, we have monochromatic. So monochromatic chooses one color within the color wheel, and then you either add black or white to it. And again, this will make something a little bit more formal, choosing just within one color palette between dark and light. It won't give you a lot of options, but it will keep things fairly simple. So the next thing I want to talk about is images and how to create different images. So you can do that through lines. Here we have different examples of how lines are used to create either texture or emphasis. On the first one, those lines are used to just create a texture in the background and frame the content within the design. And then in the one below, we use the lines to create emphasis and show movement that emphasizes that moving from context to creating to protective environments for prevention. I just took the word moving and chose to show that through lines and portray that movement. So sometimes it could be very literal, and other times you could use it more as texture in the background. Similarly, you can do that with shapes. So these examples we have here, we use shapes to kind of convey the text chat bubbles. Again, the idea of community of practice is where people can talk to each other, so we use those text bubbles. And then for Prevent Connect, we did a survey where we wanted to hear from people. And again, these little text box chats were used to create a frame, but also texture in the background, and also used to communicate an idea. So you could do that not only with text boxes or chat boxes, but with different shapes as well. And here we have an example of different textures. So a lot of the time when I'm creating a design, I will start out with the text and make sure that that is strong. But a lot of the times that doesn't feel like it fills the space enough, or it looks very bland. So then I like to add a texture that, you know, can really spiff it up and make it look a little bit more visually pleasing. So here I have a couple examples of what that texture can look like. So at the top, I just had kind of like a watery texture, and those two just to create something in the background that wasn't a solid color and break up the space a little bit. And then below that, I have the January one where it's a little bit more graphic, and it's conveying less information, so I think that allows it for it to be more graphic. And then on the side, we have some different examples of how you can create texture, either through shapes or low opacity photographs. So the next thing I want to cover is illustration. I know somebody asked a question about using icons and, you know, using that more as a support to what you're trying to communicate instead of just text. A lot of the times we use language and text as the main format of communication, but we can also use illustration to help with that. So here we have a couple of different examples. So we have an illustration that is just very much showing this idea of a powerful, strong woman. And this one was created for a certificate after a self-defense class. So obviously it's so literal. And then we have the one for the transgressive theater for sexual health. So again, here we're talking about sexual health. And then we pair that with drama or theater, and we create this image that supports the idea that we're conveying of theater and sexual health. And then something that we use a lot in reports or infographics is icons. So at the bottom, we have a couple of different icons of maybe like collaboration or group, and then the light bulb for an idea, and then the drop point for location. So these are all really great examples of how you can use illustration to better support your ideas. And then finally, we go to photography. So in our field, I think it's changing, but in the past, we often saw these very triggering images to help support these ideas that we are trying to combat. But when we're using triggering images, it kind of defeats the purpose, right? So the outlet that we're trying to use now is to show examples of what we want our world to look like, without these different issues. So in some of our communications and reports, we've tried to use images that show that and show examples of what healthy relationships and healthy communities look like. Not only that, but we also want it to be a good representative of our communities. So using people with different capabilities, showing people of color on these, showing, not only a relationship between a child and a mother, but also a child and a father figure. So just keep these in mind when you are looking for images, that they communicate and that they resonate with your audience because they are similar to your audience. Some places that you could look for images that don't have copyright are Unsplash, Pexels, and broadly gender photos. And we have the links included in here if you want to take a look at those later. The next thing I wanted to cover was design assets, and the first thing I want to cover is typography. So again, typography, much like images and shapes, can convey different feelings to your audience. So we have a serif font, which is the one in that top left corner, and that's the one with the little feet on it. And that will usually convey something more formal to your audience. The opposite of that, or on the other side, is a sans serif font. There's without the little feet. It's what we're using on the PowerPoint slide today, and that will usually convey something a little bit more modern. It's less traditional. It's a little bit more sleek. So it just depends what you're trying to show to your audience. And then below those two, we have a couple of different fonts. So we have Script, which is really pretty, but it's also hard to read when you're showing full paragraphs or a long list of information on any design. It's going to be harder for your audience to read all of that because it's just harder for your eye to make out each individual letter. And similarly with display fonts, these can be used for headings or subheadings, but showing a whole paragraph in this or even a long sentence is going to be harder for your audience to read. And then there are places where you can download fonts for free. Google Fonts is awesome because you can use them digitally on like websites and things, but you can also download them to your computer and use them for printed materials. And you can preview them before you even download them. So that's really awesome. And then Font Squirrel also has a couple of free fonts you can download as well. So with that, when you're choosing your fonts, make sure that you're keeping on one document only 1 to 2 different types of fonts. And on the right-hand side, we see that image with the different examples where they're contrasting fonts with bold and regular, where they're using a serif and a sans serif, and then a display, and then a serif. So just be mindful when you are creating content that, you're not choosing 5 different fonts, because that's a lot of visual information for an audience person to consume. And we don't want to distract them from the content that we're giving them. The next principle, or the next thing I want to talk about is principles of composition. And here we're talking about negative space. So a lot of the times when we're given a format or a medium, we want to fill that space completely because it's there, and we just are not comfortable with that negative space. That makes it hard for our audience to read the information, and it it just doesn't look right to your eye. So on the left-hand side, we have an example where the space is completely filled and all the content is there. It's the same information as the one on the right, but again, it's not as visually pleasing to your eye. So on the right-hand side, we have the counter example to that, where we do allow some breathing room for your eye to kind of take a break between the images and the content and information that's given across. So I want to show an example of an image that was shared with us by Family Services of Tulare County. So on the left-hand side, we have their poster that they use to promote a leadership conference. And this poster is so exciting, right? We know that it's free, and we know that it's Saturday, September 28th, 2019. And then we know a lot of other information because it's all like filling the space. As somebody walking by this on campus, maybe I look at it and maybe I read all of it, but it's kind of hard to differentiate the different types of information that are in here. Whereas in the right-hand side, if I'm walking by it, I can clearly see that it's the leadership conference. And if I want to learn more about it, then I can come and take a closer look and see what it's all about, see when it's taking place, that it's free, the location. And again, it's not overwhelming me with like visual content of like images and text. There's some breathing room in there for me to take a break between the different information. The next thing I want to talk about is alignment. So when we're creating content, we want to make sure that we have kind of a grid that our audience can follow with their eye. So here I have two examples of how we align the images and the text corresponding to those images. So both of these are great ways of doing it, but they're different ways. So we can align things centrally where things are symmetrical, or we can do it a little bit more asymmetrical, but it's still a balance. Like visually, you can see that things are still lined up. Here we see another example of how we use these two different alignments. So here we have the newsletter that went out a couple of days ago with where like the header and the footer, since it's overarching information, it has that center alignment. But then when we start getting to more content-heavy information, then we start using different forms of alignment. So all the text is aligned in a certain space. So when they move on to the next information, they are aware and they have a better understanding of where that information is going to be. If we switch it up on our audience, then it's kind of confusing. And again, they're trying to fill that with what they thought was going to be there, and when it's not there, it's a little bit more confusing for our eye to keep up with. So using the alignment, again, helps for our audience to better consume the information that we're trying to give to them. We can also use contrast to organize information. So here we can use contrast through colors, and separate different things that way. So if one thing is in a blue color and then the rest of it is in a gray, we know that the blue is different from the gray. We can also do it with size. So if we have all blue boxes, we know that the bigger one is different from the little one. So we know those are two different groups. And then we can see an example of this with Ashley and Tori's names. So we know that their names are names because they're in blue and they're a little bit bigger, and then their title and organization are slightly smaller and in a different color. So again, this creates that contrast and difference in the different types of content that we're presenting to our audience. And you can use this in paragraphs and subtitles and headings to differentiate that And you don't always have to use both. You can use one or the other by using color or size. And here we have another example where we use that again. So we have the California RPE. It's a little bit smaller, so it's important information, but kind of secondary. Then we have that title, which is in bold, and if people want to learn more about that, then they go down to the not bolded font to learn the details of that web conference. So again, these are subtleties, but they're really helpful when you're organizing information. The next thing I want to cover is proximity. So I think we saw this in the example of the leadership conference poster where everything filled the space and there was no separation for the content that was in there. So here we can see a similar example where all the text is just in one area, and again, there's no break for your eye to have between the different content, and there's no separation for your brain to be able to separate the different types of content that you're consuming. And then on the right-hand side, we have where we can separate the title and the subtitle or the tagline, and then we can separate the information of the date and the place, and then the least important information of who it's hosted by can be kind of in the back or smaller at the bottom of the page. So again, just using these different tools to better organize your information is so helpful when your audience is consuming the content. So here we see an example where I use that in this web conference graphic. So we have the title and subtitle in one area, the date and time, and then who is putting it on or who is being hosted by, a lot smaller in the corner. And then with all of these different tools, we can start to see branding or repetition in our content. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we have the sexual violence research report that we put out. And so even for the materials that we use to market that, they have a similar feel. They use the same font, same color palette as the report itself. And then on the right-hand side of that, we have a couple of posters that were promoting consent. And again, the illustrations are similar style. The color palette is the same with using that blue, yellow, and dark blue. And while they're all different, we know that they're all relating to each other. We know that they're coming from the same place because of those repetitive elements that they chose to use. So just keep that in mind when you're creating something. To create that brand guide at the beginning of, I'm going to use these colors and this color palette, this font. I'm always going to have my organization or program logo at this spot. Then that's going to create that repetition so your audience is more aware of where it's coming from and that they're aware that it's coming from the same organization every time. Another thing I wanted to cover was hierarchy. So again, we talked about this when we were going over the elements of creating this hierarchy so your audience can better consume the information. So we have two different examples here. The first one that says you will read this first, and then you read this, then this one, and you will read this at the end. So using the different text sizes, we can create that different hierarchy. On the right-hand side, we can see that as well, where like the headlines, the most important information, or the title of the content is going to be bigger and a different color, and then our subheaders will be slightly smaller and bolded, beneath that, and then the full content or the body content will, be a little bit smaller. So once the person is engaged, they can go in and read that detail. So we talked about this before of alignment and visual balance. So here we have two different ways that visual balance is used. So you don't always have to align all your content in the middle. I think I see this a lot because it's so comfortable of just aligning everything in the center because it fills the space symmetrically and then it looks visually balanced. But that's not the only way to create visual balance. You can also create it by putting content on the right and left side. So not all of your text has to run directly in the middle of your graphic. You can have an image on the side, and that's going to visually balance it and fill the space in a similar way as a center-aligned one. So both of these are correct, but don't feel that you always have to use that center alignment to create that visual balance. And here we see this with real examples of the two different graphics that are communicating the same thing. So we have the one that we used for the PowerPoint slide, and then the graphic that we used to promote it on social media and newsletters. So again, they're both communicating the same information, and they're both visually balanced, but in two different ways. A couple of different tools to remember that can also help you create that balance in your design are the rule of thirds. So that's the one on the left. So we often see this in our cameras on our phones where we have that grid where it splits the screen into thirds. And then those points where the lines cross are usually where your eye likes to go to. So whenever you place information there, it's just very pleasing to your eye. So we see that in the first example of where they created that, they display that information on that left line, and then the rest of the information or the visual fills that other third that's left over. And then another rule to consider when creating design is the golden rule, which is based on the Fibonacci sequence. So here we can see there's that focal point where the animation is, their head is, that's kind of like the focal point where the eye goes to. And then the rest of the space is filled with that content. So using these tools can also help with laying out your information in a more dynamic way. So after you've created your beautiful design and you've used all the different tools to help you out to make it beautiful, you probably want to go back to your stakeholder, your supervisor, your program director to get some feedback and critique on what you have created. A lot of the times this is difficult because I think when you're so in the process, you kind of forget of that exterior person or how someone's going to see it who doesn't know all the content. So it is super helpful to get somebody who's not directly in it or directly designing it, get some feedback, because sometimes when we're so close to it, we kind of lose sight or just can't perceive it in the same way as our audience will. So with that, I want to show another example that was provided to us of what that might look like. So here we have an example of a movie screening that was a poster for a movie screening that was shared. I believe it's maybe like at a high school. So if somebody brought this to me, some things I might say is, hey, I really like this. I really like how you're using the rules of third to divide the space up. I like that the graphic uses the same font throughout. It makes it really easy to separate the information. I know what it is, what the date is or the time, and if I want to know the details, I know where to find the details. Some critique I could give would be, hey, I noticed these things could maybe improve the overall graphic if you chose a secondary font for the secondary information at the bottom. This very bubbly font makes it hard to read when it's smaller. And also the white lines at the bottom kind of distract me from the content. Could you make those a little bit thinner so they're not as graphic and attention-grabbing? So yeah, these are some of the, thank you, Edwin. So there's some of the feedback I would give. So things that are not helpful are, oh, I don't like this color teal, change it. Like, that's not helpful. Like, that has nothing to do with the content or the ideas that we're trying to create. Maybe it's not the correct color teal for your organization, and that would be more helpful to bring up of like, hey, our teal's this color instead of this one. But just be mindful when you're either giving critique or receiving critique. Sometimes people just need an example of what you want to hear from them and what helpful critique is. So finally, after you make those changes, after the critique, you will go ahead and finalize your files. So depending on the format that you are using, you will export it or publish it as a different file type. So the most common file types that we have are PDFs that are commonly used for documents. These are great and accessible to share online. It makes it easier for people to download instead of like a Word document that can then be edited, or maybe if somebody doesn't have Word, then they might not be able to download the document at all. So PDF makes it really accessible. It also keeps all the information in there, and by that I mean is if there's text in there, then that text is going to remain in the file, and it'll allow a screen reader to read that text if someone's using a screen reader. The opposite of that, or on the other side of the spectrum, would be an image file. So common image files are JPEGs and PNGs. So a JPEG is not going to retain that text in there. So that's when we use alternate text or captions when we're uploading those files, because then a screen reader can read that because that text is no longer there. It's just an image of a text. And then the difference that I want to share between the JPEG and the PNG file is with a PNG file, you can make the background transparent. So I know a lot of us have seen a logo with maybe like a white box around it when we're trying to put it like over like texture or an image. And we don't know why that white box is there. It's usually because it's a JPEG version of the file. But creating a PNG version of that will allow for that transparency, so you don't have that box that's containing it. Also, things to keep in mind are the dimensions. So when you're creating a design or exporting it, you want to be aware of the dimensions that you're doing it at, because if you create a design for a poster, if you do that at an 8.5 by 11, finalize it, and then you're ready to export it, and then you want to blow it up to 24 by 36, it's going to be super pixelized and hard to read and not legible. So just be aware of the dimensions and the DPI and PPI when you're creating these designs and exporting them as well. And then DPI and PPI is the dots per inch or pixels per inch. So when you're working in digitally, if you're going to be sharing images on social media or uploading things to a website, the DPI can be a lot smaller. But when you're printing things out, the PPI should be at least at 240, and the dimensions should be to the full dimensions. You don't want to be stretching anything out when you're printing it. So you should be designing to the final dimensions that you'll be exporting that to. And finally, we have a couple of different links. So like I mentioned earlier, we have Canva, and they do have the premium or the plus account free for nonprofits, and they have an application that you have to fill. There's Creative Market, where they upload different design elements that you can download. Humans is a place where you can download these little images of different types of illustrations for humans. Cover.co has free stock videos. The Noun Project is super awesome. They have different icons. You can just search any term or word in there, and it'll come up with different types of icons that go with that. And then the big list of free design resources, that's just a giant list of different links to different places that have resources for free. And we will be uploading the PDF of the slides online, and we'll be sharing this with everyone who is here and who signed up to be here. So with that, I want to go ahead and, since we still have some time, take some questions. If I didn't cover something, if maybe you want to ask me something more specific, now is the time to do so. So just go ahead and type it in the text box or the text chat.
Thank you, Celeste. And while we wait for folks to type in, just wanted to thank you again for sharing all of your expertise with us. I know this is super invaluable information, both in terms of resources and things that people can use and apply to their own work with getting prevention messages out there, too. It looks like Liat is giving a plug for genderphotos.vice.com for folks who want to show trans people in your materials. Yes, absolutely use that. And Liat, that's a free resource, correct? Yes, it's a free resource. Awesome. So we also want folks to know that we will send the slides in the follow-up emails too. And the slides will have links to everything that that Celeste had gone over today too. So you should already have the slides in an email from this morning, but we'll go ahead and send those out again as well. And if you have additional questions, we have about 15 minutes left with each other, so please feel free to add those into the text chat. And Celeste, as people are thinking of their questions, do you have any final words, final pieces of advice, or anything to help folks get their questions going?
I think something that's really helpful to both you and I with working on Prevent Connect has been a branding sheet that we created. So we created a sheet with the different colors that we use and the different fonts that we use. So whenever we're creating a new resource, we can easily go there and remember or refresh ourselves with that information. Or just copy and paste it if we need like that color hex code I think that's been super helpful for us in Connect.
Yes,
especially for you and Ashley who are not on the design side when you're creating like a document that maybe you don't need my help with. It's so easy for you to reference that.
Mm-hmm. That is.
There's a question here from Leon. For a campaign that needs to look cohesive but also has separate products for different populations, what do you recommend? Help me.
So for something like that, I would recommend creating different styles for those different populations. So maybe choosing a color palette like the triad one or the analogous one. Maybe for the content that's going to be, for example, teen specific will be blue. And then anything that's going to be going out to legislators will be in purple, but keeping maybe like the same font cohesive throughout. Things that could vary between the different examples would be like the images that you're using. Obviously, the content is going to be different, like the actual copy. But again, establishing what the differences are so you can easily reference when you're creating more content for that is going to be so helpful. And then for the overall campaign, if there's a logo that's going to go on all of those or the name of the campaign that's going to go on all of those, it's going to link all of them together, but it's going to allow you to have some differences to separate the different audiences that you're trying to reach. So something that will stay consistent would be like that header logo of the campaign, the font, and then the thing that would be changing out would be that specific color throughout. No problem.
And then from Adriana, how do I help my college students youth club with creating flyers? Adriana doesn't feel like she has a trained eye and wants them to create them. What is your advice for guiding that work?
So in the past, I worked at a student center at Sac State where I went to school at, and we helped students create like these giant posters for symposiums. And so that was an issue that we always ran into of like, how do we teach these non-designers, these students, how do we teach them to create something to convey all of their content? So we kind of came up with a format that they could just fill in the blanks and then fill in the different design elements so they can choose their colors and images that they chose, but they all kind of chose the same format. So what I would suggest for creating flyers is kind of giving them that format of like, hey, your flyer must include the title of the event or program that you're promoting. It must include a date and time, a link for more information or a phone number for more information, and it also must include our logo. So kind of breaking it down with the content that they need to fill and then allowing them the freedom to personalize it in whatever way they want to, I think would help a lot. And then if you don't feel comfortable critiquing or revising those, maybe creating a group critique where everybody puts up their flyer on the wall and you all go over it as a group of like, hey, what's working here? Would you stop and read this? What's missing? What doesn't work? Is there any problematic things within it? So that's how I would go about that. And is there a website that could help? I mean, I think looking at examples of what other people are doing. So the ideation slide that we went over at the beginning. So even Pinterest or Behance, and just looking up event flyer or youth flyer, you'll see so many different examples of what's being created. And even though you believe you don't have a trained eye, you will be able to see, oh, that works and that doesn't work. Going through the flyer and asking yourself the question of answering the questions from the creative brief, of like, oh, I know who this is for. I know where this is going to be at. I know what the end goal of this flyer is. If those answers can be questioned through what the flyer is conveying, then it's doing a job. If there's things missing, then those will be obvious to you. So I would recommend those as looking at examples and kind of comparing that with what they're creating. If you need a platform for people to create things on, Google Slides, even though it's kind of like a PowerPoint format, you can create a flyer on there and you can change the dimensions of your slide. So if you're putting everything on one slide and you export that as a PDF or as an image, then that's the flyer right there. So you don't have to have you don't have to have Canva for all your students. You don't have to have Illustrator or any other fancy design tool. You can do it on Google Slides or on PowerPoint if that's accessible to them. No problem. Thank you, Adriana, for those questions.
And what about having other folks look at them, or just taking them out to groups, representative of the people you're trying to reach, and just getting kind of an informal feedback on whether it looks appealing.
Yeah, I think something to keep in mind with that, of like where your audience lives or where they're getting their information at, is super important. If you're targeting a teen group, maybe Facebook is not the best platform for that, because we can see in different reports and data that the primary users of Facebook are not teenagers. It's I think audiences over like 25. Whereas maybe a platform like Instagram or a school quad is going to just gain more traction for that, and more visibility for that content that you're creating. So keeping in mind of where your audience is at and how they're consuming information is super important. And then, as Jesse mentioned, how do we test what we created with them? So if you're working with a group of teens at your school, before you share this content with the whole school, if you're working with a specific group, then asking for their feedback and asking them questions like, hey, if you saw this poster on the quad, would you be interested? Would you stop and read it? If not, why? If you did, would you get all the information you needed? Asking them, hey, would this be something that you would like on someone's Instagram feed? Things of that sort. And then for audiences that I think are a little bit more outside, knowing where they go to meet. So I think during NSAC we had somebody who was trying to get people who were retired over the age of 65, and she didn't know how to reach them. So maybe looking at where in your community are those people hanging out? Are they going to the YMCA? Are they hanging out at the library? Is there a local coffee shop that you've seen this demographic hang out at? And maybe creating a poster that goes there. So yeah, just being aware of where your audience is at and how they consume media, I think is so important and helpful. We have another question asking, is there any way to evaluate or track how many people see or engage with visuals when not online? Honestly, no. I mean, you can have somebody sit there and count. I think the best way to evaluate that for specific things would be setting those goals at the beginning of maybe you're trying to get 100 people at this event. So at the event, you would have somebody counting the people that are coming through the entrance to make sure that you met that goal or to see if you met that goal. You can also do a post-event survey where you ask people how they heard about the event, how they were made aware of it, things of that sort. Let's see.
So,
Tori.
It's me. I'm looking up a link to share with you right now too. So I know this applies a lot when we think of like social norms campaigns and social marketing. So Prevent Connect has done a couple of web conferences on this. So you might be able to find some inspiration there as far as what other folks have done to evaluate or just other ideas of ways that you can evaluate those kinds of social norms campaigns. What Celeste had mentioned about doing a post-event survey absolutely works. We had on the first link that I posted from evaluating social norms and social marketing campaigns for sexual and domestic violence prevention, we had Maury Nation on that web conference. And after the web conference, Maury also shared with us the specific evaluation measures that his team had used to evaluate their social norms campaign. And this social norms and social marketing campaign was online, billboards, and all of that too. So they did have to have a metric for those offline engagement pieces. And the resources link that I just posted, that contains links to the specific evaluation measures that Maury and his team used to evaluate those offline portions of the campaign. You are welcome. Do folks have other questions for Celeste?
I think we're good.
Okay.
Well, we hope that this was helpful to you in beginning to think about how you might plan, design, and visuals for your programs. If you have any follow-up questions or thoughts, please feel free to contact us. If you, I'm going to put both Sarah and I's emails in the chat. And if you are an RPE program, definitely there are ways that we can help provide technical assistance to your program. And if you are not an RPE program or a California RCC, contact us anyway because, I mean, we'll still help however we can. So please get in contact with us. Please share your examples so that we can share them with your colleagues. Somebody brought up not reinventing the wheel, so I definitely like to connect folks to learn from one another. You all have so much wisdom and expertise. So if I can connect you to each other, I always hope to do that. So thank you for being part of the web conference this morning. And we will hope to talk to you again soon.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Celeste. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Sarah, who is in the training right now, for bringing us all together.